This is a tutorial for the hanging buckle display by Raw Designs. You can find a PDF template and instructions on our Etsy shop at Raw Designs Equestrian. And you can also find a separate listing there for an SVG if you want to cut the display with your laser. If you are looking to find more products and services by Raw Designs, go ahead and visit rawdesigns.biz. This tutorial can be made with 2 layers of leather or just one. I like to use 2 layers, especially with the cowhide, because the cowhide is a bit thin, and then I have a nice smooth back that looks very nice and professional in the end on this product. If you want to use just one layer, then make sure it's nice and thick and fairly stiff, hangs nicely, as well as it's strong enough to hold the buckles in place. For 2 layers of leather, you're going to want to have the 2 different pieces in 5 inches wide by 27-inch long. For one layer, you can have 5-inch by 30-inch. And the difference between the two is that with one layer, you can cut all in one piece with that strap at the very top of the piece. Whereas with the 2 layer, I like to cut the strap separately and attach it between the 2 layers. If you're familiar with printable sewing patterns and putting together tiled PDF patterns, you can skip this part, but I know it is confusing to some people who this may be new to. You're going to start by only printing the first page and double checking that it is the proper size. Print at 100% or actual size, and then measure the little square that shows you that it should be 1 inch. Then go ahead and print pages 2 through 4. As the instructions show, you would line up all of your pages and tape them together to complete your pattern assembly. However, in this case, you don't have to tape them all together because we have a lot of separate cutouts on different pages. We do need to tape together the top and the bottom of the body. However, all the patches don't need to be taped together. So what you're going to do is you're going to want to line up those notches, and you can also see the corner that lines up says A. The other two also say A. So I want to trim one of these. And so in this case, I'm choosing to trim the bottom of the top page so that then I can place that right on top of the other page and line them up, tape them together. At this point, I'm going to speed up the video and just talk you through it because I am taping the pattern together and then just cutting all the pieces out on the outside lines. So this would be the display body. Anytime I refer to the body, it's going to be the large piece. And that's the piece that you're going to use for both the front and back if you're doing 2 layers. So as you can see, it's about 5 inches wide and 27 inches long, not including the strap. So here we cut out the strap. I call it a loop there. If you're only using 1 layer, you're going to tape that on. These are your buckle straps. So that's why I call the other one, that was the hanging loop. These are buckle straps. And then these are going to be your additional pieces. This one is just a template if you want to make your display longer. That is equal to every section that's already on there. So you're just going to, however many buckles you want, you're going to add that length to your body. These are decorative options, so you're going to want to choose one. And it's going to have the outside layer, that's your body. That's the same as the body. So you're going to put that right on top of that square and replace it. I'm showing you that it's the exact same size as each of the buckles. So if you wanted to just have another buckle and you don't want a decorative layer, that's fine too. So this is just replacing that top section for your decorative option. And the reason that we have that smaller shape is in case you want to do a patch on your display. I'm showing you here that I like to round off my corners. So I'm doing that manually with a pencil, and it is up to you if you want to do that or not. Again, I'm just going to speed up my video as I go through, round off all the corners, and then cut them according to my lines. So now we're ready to lay out our cowhide and trace the pattern onto the back and cut it out. So I'm making sure that the hair is going to run top to bottom. So I need to know which way the hair lays. And I also have a flaw in this hide, so I want to mark it so that I make sure not to cut the flaw as part of my display. I'm going to trace the pattern on the back side. You can see that I've already cut a very straight line that runs in the direction of the hair. So I'm just going to place my pattern flush to that straight line. I put it backwards right away because I was thinking about cutting it correctly according to the front, but it's symmetrical, so it doesn't really matter at this point. Here you see that I'm using a quilting ruler, and I'm just going to line it up along the edges and take my pattern out because this is a much nicer straight edge to draw against than the printer paper that I was using. So I'll just get that lined back up with the edge at 5 inches, and then I'm going to trace the short end and the length of the ruler. Again, I'm speeding it up as this is pretty straightforward. And then once I've done those 2 lines, I put my pattern back down and I'll trace the top decorative edge. I do a lot of work to make sure that my pattern is on just right. So you can see that I'm just using a regular pen for this. It's not going to show through to the other side. And because I'm using 2 layers, we're not going to see it on the final product. If you're using 1 layer, you need to be a little more careful about that. For cutting, I'm going to lay my straight edge back down and I'm using a rotary cutter. You might be using different tools, but this is how I do it. And I'll just lay that right up with that straight line that I marked and cut against the ruler. I'm going to do that on my 2 straight sides and go back in with my leather shears to get all the rounded edges. So now I'm going to prepare the back layer, and as you can see here, I have quite the mismatch of a piece that I've kind of Frankenstein together, and I'm not going to include that as part of this tutorial. So just pretend like I have one whole piece of Latigo leather here. And I'm just making sure that it's wide enough in this instance. You can see there's some blemishes on that that I want to avoid. However, it is the back, so depending on how picky you want to be with your piece, that may not be as big a deal. You'll notice that in this instance, I'm actually not tracing it and I'm not cutting it exact because I want to leave it just slightly bigger than the front side, and I will trim it once I'm done sewing. When I use the sewing machine, there is a tendency for the needle to come at an angle and miss the bottom layer. So I like to sew first and trim up when I'm done. So again, I leave maybe an 1/8 inch, maybe not that much, but I just leave a little extra. So here I'm doing the instructions just slightly out of order. We're going to cut our buckle straps and we're going to cut a strip of 1.5 inch wide so that we can get all 3 of those pieces in one strip. I've got 2 strips here because I'm trying to use up scrap, but you'll see now that I'm gonna cut them to their 3-inch lengths. So now I'll have, in this case, maybe 4, but basically I'll have 3 pieces of 1.5-inch wide by 3-inch long straps. And then I'm gonna go over and take my end punch. If you don't have an end punch, you're just gonna trace that rounded off edge and cut it with your rotary or your scissors or your straight knife, whatever you prefer. But fortunately, I have this wonderful punch, so I'm just going to mark the very end, center my punch tip on it. Oh, and I'm even attempting to do multiples here, which sometimes is good and sometimes isn't. So we'll see how that goes. Looks like I still had to clean up the tips afterwards, but they should all be just about the same exact size, and that end punch is really a lifesaver. For your hanging loop, you're going to want to measure how wide your D-ring is. In the piece that I give you, it's 3/4 inch. So if you have a 3/4 inch D-ring, that should be appropriate. But you're essentially going to cut out a strap to fit. In the instructions, it says 1 inch. But I believe in your actual cut template, that is going to be 3/4 inch. So just be sure that you know what size that you need. And then I have it as 3 inches long. And that way you have enough room to fold it in half and stitch it into your project. At this point, you're going to bring your own creativity into the display if you choose to do a patch. I have designed and created a laser engraved leather patch, but you could do a tooled patch or some completely different piece of decorative art on your display. So I'm just using some leather glue. You can use leather cement, whatever you choose as your glue or adhesive. I just fold my pattern at that bottom line of the patch just to make sure I know exactly where I'm placing it. Then lay something flat and heavy on top of it to let it dry. At this point, I'm going to take it over to my sewing machine and stitch that patch into place. Again, I'm not going to go into too much detail because this may have to be another tutorial on stitching, but all of the loose threads are going to be pulled to the back and those will be in between the layers anyhow. So I do not need to backstitch in this case or tie any knots. I just bring those threads to the back, and unfortunately I get out of frame here so you can't see that part. At this point, we're ready to put the back and the front together and making sure to attach the D-ring with the hanging loop between the 2 layers. So I'm going to dab some glue on the ends of the hanging loop. And of course, I've already put my D-ring, slipped it over so I don't get glue on that. And I'll push those ends together and clip it with a Clover Wonder Clip, which are really great. Or you can use binder clips. And then we're going to glue that to the back, inside of the back. So it's the rough side of the back layer, and clip that in place as well so that doesn't move. Now we're just going crazy with glue here because that, again, that hide is not always easy to work with. It's going to take a bit. I want to make sure and get my edges good. I want to get them good with glue, but not messy, because that's where I feel like it'll start coming apart. If I stitch it down, I don't want those edges to separate either. And so then I go ahead and glue my backside as well and spread that out real good. Make sure to get those edges. And eventually we're going to press the one side to the other side as well lined up as we can. And we're going to make sure that that very top center is lined up appropriately, because we can't cut that later with that hanging loop there. So now clip it in place, really push down and make sure there's no wrinkles. that all the edges line up in a way that works so it's not getting all wonky. You're not gonna lose the back. So once again, we're gonna head over to the sewing machine and we're gonna go along that outside layer. Of course, if you want to hand stitch, you certainly may. That is completely up to you. With the PDF file, you're going to have to figure out where those stitches are going to go and chisel out the holes or hand sew, whichever way you prefer. And with the laser files, we do have the option of the holes being cut for you. So you don't have to do a whole lot of work punching through the leather. You can use your laser to punch through and then you can just stitch through those holes. Here I am showing you that I'm going to pull those threads to the back. I believe you can see it this time. Not great, but kinda. So I'm going to pull on that loop, get those threads to the back of the project. Now they will be seen this time. They won't be hidden. So we want to do our best to make them look nice, although at least it's to the back of our project. Looks like I got a little bit of a messy spot up there, a little snarl, some loops that I have to take care of. So I'm going to take the product, flip it over, and now I'm going to trim those threads up fairly close and use a lighter to melt them down right to the leather. I'm trimming up that snarl as well, and I'm going to melt that so that those pieces all stick together. Take my lighter. And of course, I'm really terrible about pushing my fingers onto it to squish it. I don't suggest this, but if you are a fellow leather worker, I'm sure that you are very familiar with this technique or may have one of your own that is much better than this. So now I'm going to trim the edges of the back, and I'm going to make sure to go right along the edge of the front layer, which is the hide, and trying not to trim extra. I use a utility knife because my backing is fairly thick. You could use a rotary blade and you could also use a scissors. I'm being especially careful up here at the top near the hanging loop because I do not want to accidentally cut into that loop. I do also trim the edges with the hair sticking out because I don't like that extra shag. I like a nice clean edge. So you'll see me cutting the hair along the edge as well. So now we're ready to attach our buckle straps. You're going to want to mark those two holes. Make sure that if you're using the front of the pattern, it's the front of the body. Back of the pattern, back of the body. This I did make a mistake on, and I punched holes incorrectly and had to go with it anyway. When you're this far into your project, you don't want to make this mistake. So go to the back of your project and flip your pattern over, but you're going to want to make sure you can see those marks from the other side. So I'm actually going to go ahead and poke into each place I want to mark, because then I can see where it poked through on the other side. So now when I flip it over, I can see all those little marks, and I'm going to take that same awl and just make tiny little punctures in each mark. And here I'm actually being really good and clipping it down to make sure that nothing moves and it's all going to be exactly where I want it. So you can see I've got my two rivet marks for the buckle strap and the two marks for holes to punch. I'm using two different punches. They're going to be size 3/16 to 1/4 inch. And I like to use a round punch where I am going to insert my rivets, but an oval punch in these places where the buckle is actually going to clip into, which would be considered your billet strap on a belt or other strap of that nature. For my rivets, I like to figure out which is the closest size in my hole punch to fit those rivets into without being too big. So I'm going to use that same hole punch for the buckle strap and the body if I can get it far enough in there. And I am struggling to reach my markings, so I am using a very odd technique that I decided worked for me, which was to hold my hole punch upright and give it a pop with my mallet at the very top. So here I'm marking my buckle straps, and those are going to be easier to punch holes into. So now I need my rivets, and I'm going to put the cap of the rivet into the top of the buckle strap and the tube or the bottom of the rivet from the back side of the body. And I'm just going to kind of push those tops onto the bottom and then use my die and rivet anvil to set those rivets. Again, this is a skill that you should already have, and there's lots of other good tutorials on YouTube as well for some of these things that I may not be able to explain everything to you at this point. Looks like I messed one up here, so removing one, not great, not my favorite thing to do. Sometimes it wrecks my leather, so you got to be really careful. And here we are in the final stretch, testing out my buckle straps to make sure that they're going to hold, that they're not too far apart, not too close together. The billet holes and the buckle straps, I want to make sure my buckles will fit on them. And here's the final product, our completed buckle display hanger.